Number 5, the classification and reclassification of things. A. Things are divided into common, public, and private, corporeals and incorporeals, and movables and immovables. 1. Common things. Common things may not be owned by anyone. They are such as the air and the high seas that may be freely used by everyone, comfortably with the use of the nature has intended them. 2. Public things. Public things are owned by the state and its political subdivision in their capacity as public persons. Public things that belong to the state are such as running waters, the waters and the bottoms of natural navigable water bodies, the territorial sea, and the seashore. Public things that may belong to political subdivisions of the state, as such streets and public squares. 3. Private things. Private things are owned by individuals, other private persons, and by the state or its political subdivisions in their capacity as private persons. 3. B. A public thing owned by the state may become a private thing. 1. The Civil Code and jurisprudence provides many examples of such reclassifications. For example, although the state of Louisiana in its sovereign capacity acquired ownership of all natural navigable waterbeds in 1812 to the high water mark, Louisiana, through its civil code, has reclassified the bank land situated between the high and low water marks, in the case of navigable waters, as private things subject to public use. That's State v. Richardson. The code provisions relating to the private ownership of alluvion and dereliction along navigable river and stream again contemplates a reclassification of such property from the public to private. The same is true of the codal scheme governing ownership of land where a navigable river leaves its channel and forms a new bed. 2. The Louisiana Supreme Court has also recognized that the bed of rivers that were navigable in 1812 but have subsequently become non-navigable can become private things susceptible of alienation by the state. C. A private thing owned by the state may become a public thing. 1. There is nothing in the Louisiana Civil Code which prohibits reclassification of property of the state from a private thing susceptible of alienation by the state to a public thing incapable of private ownership. 2. The same legislative reclassification takes place when a formerly non-navigable waterbed within tidal overflow lands acquired by the state becomes navigable in fact prior to divestiture in such lands of the state. The bed of the waterbed, unlike the tidal overflow lands which contain, becomes a public thing subject to public use and insusceptible of private ownership. 3. There is no sound reason to distinguish between the inalienable character of the navigable beds water existed in 1812 and were acquired under the equal footing doctrine and natural navigable waterbeds, which, through non-navigable at the time of such bottoms, were acquired by the state of Louisiana under a federal grant or by other means of acquisition, become naturally navigable prior to segregation by the state. The public interest which favors retention of ownership of the bed in the state to assure free use of the waters for navigation and transportation in the same in each use. D. A private thing owned by an individual may become a public thing. In Miami Corp v. State, the court recognized that when private property becomes part of a bed of a navigable lake of the state of Louisiana by natural processes, the submerged land area becomes a portion of the bed, a public thing insusceptible of private ownership. 2. When a navigable river or stream abandons its bed and opens a new one, the owners of the land on which the new bed is located shall take the way of the indemnification, the abandoned bed, which each proportion to each quantity of land he lost. If the river returns to the old bed, each shall take his former bed. 3. If a non-navigable stream becomes navigable, it would cease to be susceptible of private ownership and would become property of the state. 4. But note, Professor Yiannopoulos indicates by the application of Article 450 of the Civil Code, a body of water which through non-navigable in 1812 subsequently becomes navigable by natural forces is a public thing. While he notes that a divestiture of private ownership by such reclassification would run afoul of Constitution prohibitions against the taking of property without compensation, no such limitation arises when the legislative reclassification occurs prior to segregation of the waterbed of the state. In fact, the navigable status of the waterbed prior to segregation precludes the creation of private ownership in the bed of the water. 6. The authority of the legislator to settle boundary disputes. A. Ownership land adjacent to False River. 1975. The title of the owners of the land of the body of water in Point Coupe parish, known as False River, shall extend to 15 feet above mean sea level. The boundary line formed at 15 feet above mean sea level marks the division between the land owned by the state and the land owned by private persons along the banks of False River. 1. The state contends that Act 285 in 1975 violates the Louisiana Constitution because it is a legislative attempt to fix boundary of the bottoms, also in that is essence by local law which was not introduced as local special act in accordance with Louisiana Constitution Act of 1974, and thus is constitutionally it's not valid. A. By adoption of Article 455, now 456, of the Civil Code in 1870, the legislature granted the banks of navigable streams to adjacent owners, defining state ownership of the bottoms of navigable streams and the land that is covered by the water and its ordinary low stage. False River was once a navigable waterway and was declared by the Louisiana Supreme Court. Thus, the state, under this Article 456, only owns the bed of the False River to the ordinary low water mark, because the record clearly supports that a finding that the low stage of a false river is considerably below 15 feet above mean sea level, and the state actually has acquired property under the statute, does not alienate any mineral property rights of the state. Hence, it does not violate of Article 9. B. It is not local or special law for several reasons. There is no evidence that this act was enacted to secure an advantage in favor of any private individual or group of individuals, and it applies to all persons possessing characteristics of the affected class. In other words, all persons owning land adjacent to False River. In settling this matter, the legislature was acting under a general authority to prescribe this procedure of settling disputes between state and citizens. That's Chevron USA, Inc. v. Lorio. 7. Rivers and streams. Navigable rivers or streams. 1. It is not that water continuously flow in order for a water course to be a river or stream. 2. If a non-navigable stream becomes navigable, it would cease to be susceptible of private ownership and would become property of the state. 3. The banks of navigable rivers or streams are private things that are subject to public use. The banks of navigable rivers of stream is the land line between the ordinary low and the ordinary high stage of the water. Nevertheless, when there is a levee in a proximity of the water established according to law, the levee shall form a bank. A. By adoption of Article 455, now at 456 of Civil Code of 1870, the legislature granted these banks of navigable streams to adjacent owners, defining state ownership of the bottoms of navigable streams and the land that is covered by the water in its ordinary low stage. B. As to navigable rivers and streams, the state still holding its sovereign capacity, all the land below the ordinary low water mark, but the banks areas between ordinary low water and ordinary high water now belong to riparian owners. 4. Privately owned land did not become subject to public use when the navigable body of water overflowed its normal bed and temporarily covered the adjacent privately owned land in question.